The boat came out of the fog without a sound and struck his hull hard enough to knock him to his knees. He was on his feet in an instant, shouting into the gray. Every name he had shot like arrows at the man who had hit him. His name was Thomas, and he had rowed this river for 40 years. He knew its moods the way you know a difficult relative. The cold pool under the calm water, the bends where the fog sat thickest, the hour the mist came down like a drop sheet. He was a careful man, and careful men are rarely at fault, which was, if you knew Thomas, the entire point of being one. Because if nothing was ever his fault, then everything was someone else's. And Thomas kept a very long list. He remembered every slight the way other men remembered birthdays. The merchant who'd shorted him a coin 9 winters back, the neighbor whose fence leaned onto his stones, his father's sharp tongue, his mother's long silences. He could recite the whole history of everyone who had ever wronged him, in order, with dates if pressed. It made him good company for exactly one drink, and poor company for the second. People had learned over the years to wave from the far bank and wait for the next ferry. Old friends started saying good night a little sooner each year, with a small tired sigh they thought he couldn't hear. He could. He only added it to the list. One more wrong done to a careful man. He never noticed how quiet his own evenings had grown, and across the water a single light burned each night in a window he'd known his whole life. He couldn't remember the last time he had rowed to the other side of that river. What he didn't know, what this one foggy morning would finally teach him, was that every boat that had ever struck him had been empty. The man he'd cursed his whole life, the one at the oars of that old pain, had never once been there. So when the boat hit him in the fog, Thomas did what he had always done. He went looking for the man. There had to be a man, some fool half asleep at the oars, some drunk who thought the river belonged to him. He couldn't see 3 feet through the mist, so he built the man out of pure fury, gave him a face, a smirk, a careless slouch, grabbed his oars and rowed hard after the shape sliding off into the gray. He was owed an apology. That's the thing about anger. It always arrives with a receipt. He'd been struck. He'd been knocked to his knees on his own cold deck. He was going to catch that boat and hold to account the man responsible. The mist tore past him in rags. He closed the gap. Closer, now close enough to strike, and the fog thinned, just for a moment, just enough, and the boat was empty. No drunk, no fool, no smirking, no careless man, no man at all. A plain little boat riding low and loose, turning slow circles as the water took it, one oar lost, the other trailing useless in the current. Thomas sat there with his mouth still open and a name on his tongue that had nowhere to go. And then the fog gave him the one thing he had never once asked for. It gave him back his own voice. All that fury rolling back to him across that flat gray water, with no one out there to answer it. He heard himself, for the first time in 40 years, bruised, righteous, alone in a boat in the middle of a wide river. Thomas heard exactly what he had always sounded like. A man shouting, with everything he had, at no one at all. And under the empty boat, he saw at last the thing he had never looked at all his years on the water. The current. Dark, wide, and patient, moving everything on its surface. The empty boat, his boat, and every boat that had ever crossed here, carrying them all wherever it pleased. The boat hadn't come for him. Nothing had ever come for him. Something upstream had simply let it slip its rope, and the river had done the rest. Now here's where the story could have ended, and where for most of us it usually does, because a careful man can look straight at an empty boat and still go hunting for the hand that loosed it. Someone upstream had been careless with that rope. Someone always is, and Thomas felt the old warm pull of it, the wish, almost a hunger, for there to have been a man after all, for somebody, anybody, to still be at fault. And it would have been so easy. It always is. Blame is the one weight a tired man will happily pick up, because at least it's familiar. He sat with that a long moment, the empty boat turning its slow circles beside him. Then he sat down. Not the boat, the hunger. It was the hardest thing he had done on that river in 40 years, and it happened in silence. no one there to witness. The current was carrying the empty boat toward the low rocks downstream, where the river dropped and broke into white. In a week, it would have been kindling, and Thomas, who had crossed half a river in rage to lay his hands on this boat, reached out for it one last time, not to grab it. He caught its trailing rope, drew the empty boat gently across to his own, and tied the two together with a good, careful knot. Then he turned and rowed back towards the shore, slow and steady against the current, one careful man towing behind him the very thing that had struck him out of the water that would have finished it. If you had stood on the bank that morning and watched the fog give him up, that's the picture you would have carried home for the rest of your life. An old man rowing steadily through the gray, and tied close behind him, following where he led, the empty boat that he had come to curse. It was quiet work, rowing against the current with a weight behind you, and in the quiet the boats began to change. Not the one tied behind him, the ones on his list. The merchant who'd shorted him the coin. Thomas saw, all at once, a man with a sick wife and debts he couldn't cover, reaching for a single coin in the dark. An empty boat. The neighbor with the leaning fence, running short on time, and Thomas never had thought to lend a hand. Empty. His father's sharp tongue, a man feeling unseen and wanting to be heard. His mother's long silences, a woman not having words for the toils of life. Empty and empty. Every boat that had ever struck him, every name he had filed away with its date, drifting loose on a current he'd been far too busy being a victim to see. And then, last and nearest, and heaviest of all, the boat he had cursed the longest. His brother. 11 years of silence, over hard words said in a hard season. The season their mother died, when grief slipped both their ropes at once and sent them crashing into each other in the fog. 2 empty boats. Thomas had spent 11 years shouting. There had never been a man at the oars. There had only ever been the current and the fog, and 2 brothers who could not see. He brought both oars to the shore. He tied the empty one where its owner might come to find it. And then Thomas did the strangest thing he had done in 40 years on that river. He untied his own boat and pointed it not towards home, but across, toward the far bank he never rowed to, and the window with its one burning light. He rowed against the current the whole way. It's harder going to someone. It's always harder than drifting. His brother was waiting at the water's edge as though he had been standing there for 11 years. Older now, gray and weary. For 40 years, Thomas had kept a speech ready for this man, a receipt with every figure on it. He had it in his mouth as the boat came in, but his brother stepped down into the water first, and without a word, the way you do something you've done 10,000 times and never stop wishing you could do again, he reached out, caught the rope of Thomas's boat, and tied it off at his own dock. He tied him off with a good, careful knot. And that was it. That was the whole of it. No speech was ever given. 2 old men stood together in the fog while their 2 boats knocked together gently. Tied to the same post at last, and the only thing Thomas ever managed to say was his brother's name. Said plainly, the way you say it to someone you have finally stopped blaming for the weather. You've done it too. We all have. Rode ourselves ragged for some boat in the fog, dead certain there was a face inside it that deserved every name we had. How many hours have you handed to someone who was never even in the boat? How many people are you still keeping in a cold cell in the back of your mind, serving a sentence for a crime the current committed? And on your own worst mornings, the day, the week, the month you were too tired, too grieved, or too frightened to steer, how many boats did you strike, adrift in someone else's fog, and never once feel the blow? Every boat that strikes you is empty. The one who hurt you was pushed by a current you never saw. The boat that struck you is empty, and more often than you will ever know. So are you. If Ancient Wisdom Without Fluff speaks to you, like and subscribe. There are more stories waiting for you. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, that's the current, telling you something. Row across. Share this with them.